I'm getting ready for class. I hope everyone's seated. Is everyone seated? Not you, Eli. You stand behind the camera. That's where you should be. Thank you.
I'm on the bed.
You're on a bed?
Yeah.
Orhan, get up. It's class. Do some jumping jacks. Refresh yourself. Well, apparently Peanut Butter Day is in January, so I want to revisit my Jif jar cake. Who decides these things? I know some of you have watched this cake before, but what I want to do is provide more insight on how I made it and provide you with some learnings that you can apply to any other jar cake you want to make. Actually, leave a comment below if you want to see me make some other sort of jar. Let's get started. Okay, so to make this Jif jar cake, I decided to bake a peanut butter cake because I think that's very fitting. But of course I put mini chocolate chips into the cake because I adore peanut butter and chocolate together. We're gonna put up that recipe, aren't we?
Oh, we are.
Oh, we are. So you can get this recipe. It's delicious. You know, most of the time you see me making cakes and I'm baking tons of cake, but I want this jar to be the realistic size. So after measuring my Jif jar, I decided to bake 6-inch round cakes, which are a little bit bigger than the cake needs to be, but once I cut off the caramelization, they're gonna be the perfect size. I remove my cakes from their pans, I level them, I layer them, and I'm going to use a circle cutter to cut them into the exact size that I need. You can also use a cake pan or any circle you have in your kitchen, like a bowl, and trim the cake using that as a guide. So now that I have all my cake rounds lined up, I'm going to simple syrup them, of course, and then I'm going to fill and stack them with chocolate ganache. Now I'm picking chocolate ganache for 2 reasons. One, like I just said, I love chocolate and peanut butter together, but 2, ganache is very sturdy. It's probably the sturdiest filling that I could choose. And because I'm not going to put a board in the middle of this cake and double barrel it, it's my safest choice. Now, what I mean by double barreling is if I was making this cake to deliver to someone, a birthday party or something like that, I would always build the cake halfway, put dowels in it, put a cake board in the middle, and then continue to build the cake. And this is for 2 reasons. Number 1, structure. And number 2, when you're cutting slices and serving, they're not so huge that they can't fit on a plate. But since I'm making this cake for you guys, and I know you want to see that cut at the end, I'm going to skip that part because I don't have to take it out of this room. I can just cut it right here when I'm done. Got it? Are you all taking notes? Why are you on your phone, Helena? Why are you on your phone?
I'm taking my notes. This is how millennials take notes.
So this cake does involve a little bit of carving. Do I still have a Jif jar? Oh my gosh! Can I have the jar? Bring me my model.
A little crunchy.
And what was mine? Mine was extra crunchy.
I like smooth, I have to say.
You look smooth. Eli, crunchy or smooth? Eli, crunchy, yes. Helena?
Smooth.
Whoa.
You know what? You two can just go. So you can see it's tapered here. We're not gonna see this part because that's where the lid is. It is very important that it's even, but it's harder to tell if you're even because you can't see the bottom surface, which is why what I choose to do is carve the top part first, flip the cake over, and then carve what will be the bottom, but on top. You basically want the angle to be the same. So the ruler is helping you determine the height of where the carving begins, and your circle cutter is helping you determine the circumference that the cake needs to remain. So now that our cake is carved, I am going to crumb coat it with chocolate ganache and chill it. And I'm choosing to crumb coat this cake in ganache. The crumb coat, as you know, is to really glue the crumbs to the cake and ensure they don't make it to the outside. So once I've crumb coated the whole cake, I'm going to put it in the fridge to chill. So now that my crumb coat is chilled, I am going to ice the cake again with chocolate ganache. We're gonna keep it nice and thin. You can use a bench scraper to help you and a small spatula to really make sure we keep those angles nice and sharp. You can use the rulers again to define those angles. Because once we move on to fondant, this is the worst time to make adjustments. So we want to make sure the shape of the jar looks exactly how we want it to look. And we're going to move on to fondant. I've colored some fondant the perfect peanut butter color. But I also noticed there's speckles in peanut butter. It's not perfectly flat and a single color. Let's face it, it's made from nuts. So I thought about how to add those speckles to my fondant, and I decided on spices. I'm kneading in some cinnamon and some nutmeg. They're both natural, so they add that natural color that I'm looking for, as opposed to using a powdered food coloring. So now this is where the fun begins. It's time to cover this cake in the peanut butter speckled colored fondant. So the first thing I want to do is cover the top of the cake with a circle of peanut butter fondant. I'm just rolling it out to 1/8 of an inch thin, and then I'm going to use a circle cutter to cut out that circle, and I'll place it right on top of the cake. Anytime you're covering something that is tall and narrow, my advice is not to go for the draping method. It will be very hard to smooth that fondant around the sides of the cake without any creasing. And so this is why I choose to cover it in panels, especially if it's narrow and it's tall. Because ganache sets up so fast, and it really dries on the surface, you'd be surprised. You wanna have a bowl of water and a paintbrush nearby, and you can just lightly brush the surface of the ganache with water, and that will help your fondant stick to the ganache. Now I'm going to roll out more of my fondant to cover the jar. So what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is drap? What is drap? I'm going to drape.
I didn't even know what you were trying to say.
I don't know what I'm trying to say. Now I'm going to drape the fondant around the cake. Okay, so you want to make sure to measure your cake, measure the height, measure the circumference, and then that way you know how big to roll out your rectangle of fondant. You always want to roll it a little bit bigger than you need it. And I'm going to use a small, smooth rolling pin to reverse roll up the fondant onto the rolling pin. And then I'm going to unravel it around the cake. Now, your cake should be nice and even, but sometimes it really helps to pick a front, and that way you know to line up the seam with the back of the cake, if that makes sense. So, does that make sense, class? So, class, so just to...
You know what would be funny?
What?
We got Helena
Yeah.
behind the butcher blog and made her like do this cake in real time. Just like
We are doing this.
What?
You like how he just volunteered you?
Why does it have to be me? Why can't it be you?
Listen, I love this.
What if you and I do it side by side?
I'm down.
Guys, I'm glad Eli's filming all this because this is proof and this is what I want for my birthday. Yeah, yes, guys, this is a very important question. Leave a comment below. What cake should Orhan and Helena have to make in the Cake Off? And I'll just stand behind you and like direct. I love this. Am I gonna be like the Dana White of this Cake Off? Can I bring that kind of energy? You know I have to deal with that seam. I'm gonna reveal the secret today, Orhan. I, Yolanda Gampp, am the seam hider. So originally I was part of the Avengers movie and they actually edited out all of my scenes. Explosions everywhere! Iron Man! Keep the enemies away! I'm hiding seams. The best way to hide a seam is to use the actual fondant you've covered the cake with, and you're just gonna take a little smidge of that fondant and you're going to dilute it with alcohol. And the reason you're using alcohol is it evaporates quickly, so when we seam hide, that paste is not gonna remain too shiny after hiding your seam. So now I can pop this cake in the fridge and I can work on rolling out my gum paste for all of the details. And in this case, all of the details make up the label. I've decided to make the label with gum paste because the texture of gum paste is more resistant, it's sturdier, and it starts to dry much faster than fondant. This is the part where you need the most precision, but you also need to be able to work at a pace where your gum paste is not drying to the point that once you wrap it around this cake, it's cracking. If this cake...
So you go through the same stress that a sniper goes through.
Yes, it's just like being a sniper. Yeah, for sure. I've talked to many snipers and they're like, how do you do it? So as you can see, the label on the jar is predominantly red. It will be easier to roll out an entire band of red and lay the colors on it. So the more we can assemble off the cake before wrapping it around, the easier it will be and the safer it will be. So what you want to do is carefully peel off the label of your jar, and then you're going to photocopy it or enlarge it to fit the cake jar that you have made. You can then cut out the parts of the label. So the first thing I want to do is cut out the band of red. I want to make sure that it's the exact right height for my jar, but I am going to leave it a little longer than it needs to be so I can cut a clean seam at the back of the cake. Then I'm going to cut out the blue, the green, the little yellow badge, the white Jif letters, all of the parts that I need, I'm going to cut out of my pieces of gum paste. So now we've cut out all our parts and we have to quickly start to put this label together. And before we do that, we have to make sure we use our food coloring marker to write out anything needed. And all the little pieces that I've cut out of the label. Are you yawning? Are you yawning in my class? Now I know how my son's teachers felt with virtual learning. Like, I don't even know if you're listening or hun. Turn on your camera. Camera's on. Now we can carefully pick up this whole label and wrap it around the cake. Once again, you want a layer of water brushed on where the label's going to be, and then you need to work as quickly as possible. And again, you're gonna cut the seam nice and clean at the back where the fondant overlaps with a ruler and a sharp knife. Now what we need to do is add all the other elements of the label. So this is where the negative space of your template comes in handy. You can hold it up to the cake. You can even keep it in place with a few straight pins as long as you're inserting them where they will be covered later. And you're just gonna line up the letters, the badge, all of the parts of the label onto the cake. You need to be really careful here, especially with the ones that you've written on with marker, because again, your hands are warm, so if you hold them for too long, you might start to smudge that marker. You just wanna, like I said, it's that fine balance of being careful, but being quick. Careful and quick. So yes, Helena.
Passing me notes in class.
Are you guys texting each other? Guys, stop passing notes. How do teachers know kids are passing notes? I passed actual notes. Yeah. And now we're going to move on to the lid. I'm rolling out more of my red gum paste, and the first thing I want to do is cut out a circle that's the exact size of the lid and glue it on top. Now, for this, you have to use piping gel, not watered down, as your glue, because it's gonna get really sticky and tacky and help the fondant adhere to plastic. And then we're gonna roll out a band of gum paste, and we're going to create the ridges. So I used what's called a ribbon cutter. It's just this plastic tool that creates those indents. If you don't have one of those, you could use the side of a ruler, for example. And then you're gonna cut out a band of fondant that is the exact height you need it to be. Keep in mind that on the real lid, you see the plastic come up a bit, and wrap that around and cut a clean seam. You know, when I made the Vegemite jar on the channel in year 1, I made the lid out of cake as well. But in the Jif jar, I chose to just cover the actual lid of a jar. So this is a perfect example in the real world of caking. If you were selling this cake and someone didn't have as high of a budget, this could be something you offer to them that lessens the price. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everyone?
Yes, Miss Anna.
Thank you.
Ms.
It's Ms. It's Ms.
I miss you.
Don't suck up to me because you want me to pick you in the challenge. Whenever I'm creating an object that is shiny or glossy, this is when piping gel becomes my best friend. It doesn't matter how exact you color your fondant. Fondant, at the end of the day, has a flat, matte surface. So what you want to do is dilute some piping gel with food grade alcohol. And then what you're going to do is use a paintbrush to paint it along the surface. Do you have any questions? Like if you'd never watched How to Cake It and you don't know me.
I know the question is for someone who's watching How to Cake It for the first time. Who is eating this cake?
Yes, everyone likes to ask who's eating the cake. Every cake I make, Helena cuts up in the kitchen and wraps it in portion. Eli, how much cake have you eaten since working here? The new person, I'm gonna say this, whoever's new on the How to Cake It team, the taking the cake home is like this new shiny like advantage. Feel free to suggest any other cakes you wanna take an extended look into. And what do you call it when you're in university and you go see a teacher talk?
A torture.
Have you enjoyed this lecture? I will see you next week. Thank you for joining me. I feel like having some Jif. Anyone? Peanut butter?